Croeso. This is James, aka JP Harker, coming to you with another video. This is 3 books that I've recently read, and I'm going to share them with you now. I'm getting it done quickly because 2 of them are library books, so I need to get them back. I've already raised fines on them because of reading time and life and all that, but the boy likes going down to the library, so there's a little bit he can play in. So it'll all end quite nicely, I am sure. But, yes, the first of those is Tolkien, and it is The Story of Kullervo. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. The Story of Kullervo, edited by Verlin Flyger. This is another one of those ones where Tolkien did not release this during his life. This is somebody else taking his notes and his history and putting them together. Now, here is the slight problem with that. You can tell this was not made to be published, and it's very obvious. And in fairness, the editor tells us from the start this was not made to be published. But it does make one wonder, well, why did you then? Apart from, you can make money if you put Tolkien on something. And I should really get into the habit of holding books up like this so you can see them rather than just sort of looking thoughtfully at something that's below what the camera can see. Sorry. The problem with it is, if you are a hardcore Tolkien scholar, if you really love to see how the great man's mind worked and where he drew his information from and his interest in language and mythology, you'd probably quite like this. As it is, it's admitted up front, this is where the bare bones of Children of Húrin came from, was this original Finnish legend which Tolkien took and had a bit of a play with and added his own ideas to and created this. He then took what he had from this and sort of cannibalized it into Children of Húrin. Children of Húrin is a cracking story. I would arguably say that I enjoy it more than I enjoy The Lord of the Rings. It has that sort of epic, semi-poetic feel to it. I really enjoy it. I couldn't get into this because it reads like what it is. It reads like the first or second draft of somebody who hasn't quite worked out where they're going with it, but likes the idea. And yet, if you're a big Tolkien fan, I'm sure it's a goldmine. I'm sure you'll be looking through this and think, wow, cracking. As it is, to me and to the average layman, I don't think you'll get much out of it. I did make note of a couple of interesting things. Because this isn't entirely the story of Kullervo, I think. The story of Kullervo ends about here. So, of a book this size, to call it the story of Kullervo is a little bit of a misnomer. The rest of it is made up of poetry and essays, and perhaps I am an ignorant man. Oh yeah, even within the story there's a lot of poetry. And perhaps I'm an ignorant man. I like a bit of Wilfred Owen. I love Shakespeare. I am, as yet, not sold on much poetry. I prefer to read things in prose. I enjoy a bit of iambic pentameter, but I like to hear it. I don't like to read it. If something's poetic, I prefer to hear somebody reciting it with a bit of performance rather than reading through it. If I'm reading through it, I'd rather read prose. But it's full of that. It's also got essays in it, like some of other Tolkien's stuff is. Book of Lost Tales that I'm working through. And it does have a couple of interesting little lines. I do love the lines, the fresh newness of hot imagination, as a description of myth. But yeah, another fun line is, due to the unfortunate existence of America, which is a little bit sassy. He means because of it, because the West is no longer a mystery. But one does get the feeling he's like, because of those filthy Yanks. But an interesting point I saw in one of his essays is, and it's something one does see a fair bit in myth, and I hadn't thought of it this way, is with a lot of this sort of myth, it's kind of made up as it goes along, the newness of hot imagination. And there's a degree of continuity, but there's a lot of, and then this happened, oh, and then this happened, oh, and then this happened. And one of the big rules of storytelling, I'll admit up front, I have not studied storytelling. I haven't made a study of creative writing. I've just read a lot of stuff. I've read a lot of other people's stuff, and I've kind of muddled through and worked it out. I am not a student of creative writing, but even I know that one of the things you need is setup and payoff. That's something a plot needs to have. If you've got something happen at the end, you need something to have set it up at the start in order for that to both make sense and for it to have a satisfaction to the reader. And in things like this, it's almost as if that doesn't matter. And even though Tolkien does setup and payoff in his work, he's sort of saying, yeah, you don't really need it if the reader is fully engaged in the flow of the story and is just wants to know what happens next because it's so engaging. And it's interesting to see one of those fundamental laws of storytelling in the words of one of the best known storytellers, the father of fantasy, just being thrown out. It's like, yeah, you don't really need it. It's handy, I suppose. Don't really need it. And that was, I think it says a lot about the story of Kullervo, that the most interesting part to me was a small section of the essay at the end. That's just me. The second library book I have was a bit of a chancer, because I've done a video on this. I think I've already released it. I've got a pile of stuff I need to check through. It's been a while. And it is a Brandon Sanderson, and it is The Emperor's Soul. And as you can probably see, it's a very short book. It's, I think, 150 odd pages. That's not even that, 130 odd pages. Now, I have not really been sold on Brandon Sanderson. Everyone says that you should, that this is, much like George Martin is often called, he's a new Tolkien. People say similar things about Sanderson. And people in work and people I know will recommend his books and say, if you want a new fantasy series to get obsessed with, read Sanderson. And I've tried twice. I tried the first of the Mistborn books, and I tried the first of the Sword of Kings, so the Shard Blades one. And I just couldn't enjoy them. They were good ideas, and the endings tend to be good, and there were some moments, and it's obviously clever, but I just didn't enjoy them. I couldn't sort of sit and read and be engaged and think, this is great. I read it and I thought, well, he's clever, I suppose, and yeah, that's probably going to happen, isn't it? And, didn't expect that to happen. But that was it. And for all the people who say, it gets better after book one, I do tend to say, well, book one is allowed to not be as good as the others, but it should still be engaging enough that you want to know what happens next. It shouldn't be a case that book one is such a slog that you don't want to know what happens, that you don't really care. I mean, so many first books are slow. Stormfront of the Dresden Files isn't as good as the others, but it's good enough that I wanted to read them. Furies of Calderon isn't as good as the others, but it's good enough that I wanted to carry it on. The two Sanderson books that I tried to start, because I wanted to get into a new fantasy series. I was going into this wanting to become obsessed with it, and I couldn't do it. It felt like a chore to read. And with both of them, the last sort of 30 odd pages, it was almost a tease to think, hang on, You're clearly good at writing because you did this bit. Now I'm kind of intrigued. But it had taken so much work to get there that by that point I'd sort of given up. This, on the other hand, was a cracking read. Now, even in my worst criticism of him, I could never say that Brandon Sanderson is not a talented author. You can tell. If anything, it makes me angrier that his books have been such a slog, because it's not like you don't know better. You are clearly good at writing. Why has it taken you this long to make this point? But this book, it really, really was good. I was engaged right from the start. We still had that explaining magic as if it's science thing, which I don't really go for. I like my magic to have some mystery to it. But, okay, if that's what you want to do, fine. That's personal preference. But we didn't have the same degree of massive info dumps of, look how clever this magic system is. It was, here's a magic system, and intermittently throughout the book we're going to say, here's why it's clever. But it didn't overwhelm things. And I think it maybe fitted in better because it's told from the perspective of someone who isn't gallivanting around. You're not expecting them to go off on adventures. They are here making a study of something, and so it fits that we're getting lots of details of this magical system. And the character is Shy, or Shay, I'm assuming Shy, S-H-A-I. She's very flawed, intelligent, but not to the point of being easily outsmarting everyone else. She's capable and resourceful, but not to the point where she can easily escape any situation. Flawed, as I say, but with definite redeeming features. She was an interesting person, doing an interesting thing in an interesting world. And I thought, this is... if his other books had been like this, I'd have been leaping into them. So, it's left me in that limbo again. I had been quite happy to write this author off as someone I was never going to read again. But I picked this up from the library just by chance, because I thought, oh, it's a slim little book. I'll have a crack at it. It won't cost me much in the way of time. And I'm so glad I did. But I'm now torn, because I think, well, is it now worth trying some of his other stuff? If I haven't liked Mistborn or the Shardblade ones, maybe I'll like something else. I don't know. So, yeah, I'm glad I read it because it redeemed my opinion of the author. But I'm annoyed that I read it because it redeemed my opinion of the author. So, we shall see. If you're someone who's not sure about Sanderson, as I was, I can strongly recommend The Emperor's Soul. It is, I like this cover more than the one I saw on Goodreads, by the way. It's got some class to it. Yeah, I'll recommend that one. And my last one of this. Oh, this is my kind of book. This is Simon Scarrow's Eagles of the Empire series, first book, Under the Eagle. And, this is my kind of thing. I should have gotten into this earlier. I've been given books in this series as gifts before, but it's isn't always clear from the cover that it's part of a long series. So over on my bookshelf over there, I have, I think, Centurion and Gladiator, which are something like books 8 and 15 of this series. And I picked them up, saw that it was part of the series, and thought, oh, crap. So I got the first one. The first one is Under the Eagle. And by Jove, this is my kind of book. It follows Cato and Macro, who are two soldiers in the 2nd Augustan Legion. Now, for them as don't know, I am here in Wales. You should know from the fact that I greeted you in Welsh. But I live in Wales, I live in Glamorgan. And about 20 miles that way is Caerleon, which is the home fort of the 2nd Augustan Legion while they were in Britain. And I grew up going there. My university was a 10-minute walk from the Legionary Museum. I have trained in martial arts in the amphitheatre there, because why wouldn't you? I've been there so many times. The 2nd Augustan Legion is part of what being here is. So, books about them, that's already a tick. and it's Vespasian is their current legate, which is another tick. And it's taking place during the reign of, so the early reign of the Emperor Claudius. That's another tick, for those of us who love Derek Jacobi and the old I Clavdivs. And we have just the right mix of army life and campaign and action, with a little bit of political intrigue and a tiny smattering of romance. And it works brilliantly. This first book, we follow Cato, who is a former palace slave who's been given his freedom on condition that he serve in the army. And he was a slave. People hear slave and they automatically think, oh, slaves in the mines or in the galleys or something like that. But a lot of household slaves in Rome actually lived quite cushy lives. It was like being a fairly high status servant in this country, so that 100 odd years ago. It was, there was hard work and you were second or third class or fourth class citizen. Citizen's the wrong word. But you led a pretty good life. If you think of the life that Jeeves leads in Jeeves and Worcester, he's living quite comfortably compared to most people of working class. And it was the same thing with Cato. He was a palace slave, but he was living quite a comfy, cushy life. But in order to have his freedom, he has to serve in the army, and that's a 20-year stint. And he's a sort of classic, sort of soft southern Jesse type, joining the army and being yelled at by drill instructors and such like. And Macro is a grizzled centurion career soldier type who has no interest at all in what is happening in the palace or any of the gossip or any of the various political factioning that is going on, and also can't read. And it's such a good pairing. They are such a good duo in this as an odd couple. And it's so well written in terms of it's colloquial but not too colloquial. The language doesn't have a sort of what's happening bro quality to it, but things like the army drill instructors, they're written like a 20th century British Army drill instructor. And that just works perfectly. It captures the mood. It may not have the beautiful language you'd associate with ancient Rome, but it has the vibe of the army. And when you're dealing with characters like this, that is exactly what you need. So I've been loving this. This begins with them being stationed in Germany and having a little bit of a scuffle there before the big expedition of the Emperor Claudius, which was the conquest of Britain. And that starts in this one. I have started the next book, which is The Eagle's Conquest, and it continues very much along the same vein. We're looking at army life, we're looking at the fighting, but we're looking at a little bit of the intrigue as well. It's fun to be in Vespasian's head, and yeah, I can just strongly recommend, if you're the sort of person who likes my books, and if you flicky through Goodreads and you see the things that I give high ratings to, you're going to like this. So thank you, Simon Scarrow, for getting me into this. Sorry, Mr. Sanderson, but this is a series that I immediately wanted to leap into, and I shall be doing exactly that. So, I'm going to do a quick sum up here. Story of Kullervo. Wouldn't necessarily recommend unless you're a hardcore Tolkien fan. The Emperor's Soul. Even if you don't like Sanderson, give this a crack, because it was a very pleasant surprise for me. Simon Scarrow's Under the Eagle. Go out and buy it and read it. It's brilliant. I'm going to leave it at that now, I think. So, I'm going to sign off there. This is James, aka JP Harker. Well vowed.